Hi guys, this is Grandmaster Eugene Perlstein, and today we're gonna try to refute the Albin counter gambit. Now, this is a very interesting gambit that a lot of d4 players face after the moves d4, d5, c4. So white offers the queen's gambit, but black says, I've got my own counter gambit idea, e5. Now, this is called the Albin counter gambit, named after a chess player Adolf Albin, who played against none other than Emanuel Lasker, the world champion. I think he played it in New York in like 1893 or so. And since then, not a lot of famous grandmasters took it up. Although I should mention that a Russian super GM, Alexander Morozevich, played it for a long time in the 2000s. And then, as you might have seen, the famous movie Queen's Gambit, Beth Harmon faced this move. Borgov played it against her, and she answered with another crazy move, e4. Well, that's not the subject of today's video. Today, we're gonna say thank you for the free pawn. We're gonna take the pawn on e5, and black does not really have a good answer. He doesn't really want to take the pawn on c4. Then we trade queens, get a better endgame. They play d4, and this is the point. So white's pawn is an extra pawn, although it's a doubled pawn, right? Black gets a little bit more space. He wants to play knight c6, and typically later try to win the e-pawn with using knight e7, knight g6 idea. So first things first, we're going to play knight f3. Simple developing move, hitting the pawn, knight c6. And here, white has tried many different setups. White has tried the sneaky move a3, which I think is quite interesting. White has tried simple developing move g3 and eventually bending the e-pawn. But the move that I like and I would recommend to you is knight b to d2. We're going to go after black's d-pawn with a very simple knight b3 idea. So black has to be careful. If he's going to drop that d-pawn, he's going to be down 2 pawns. So what are black's options? Well, black could still keep the main line, same idea to play knight e7 followed by trying to go after the pawn. Sometimes they play knight here to protect the d-pawn. But first, let's look at this hyper-aggressive move bishop g4, saying, you know what, I'm not going to go after the pawn just yet. I'm just going to develop and hopefully try to gain an advantage. After all, white is a little bit underdeveloped at the back rank there. So what do I like here? I like to ask the bishop his intention after the move h3. Give black an option. Do you take the knight? Do you retreat to e6? Or do you retreat to h5? So we're going to look at these options. So what happens if bishop h5, for instance, keeping the, pseudo pin going? Obviously, we're not going to push the e-pawn yet. Instead, we're going to play g3, queen d7. Black is going for rapid queen side castling, bishop g2, castles, castles. And now let's talk a little bit about this position. Black is still a pawn down, okay? White's king is absolutely safe. There is no way that black can create any attack. And if anyone's king is unsafe, I would probably say that it's black's king, which is in a little bit of danger. And if black tries to play d3, trying to really pin the knight on f3 after the e-pawn trade, for example, pawn takes, queen takes, now possible ideas, knight d4, putting extra pressure on the knight. White has a very simple counterplay. Queen a4. It is actually black's king, like I mentioned, who is in grave danger. And let's say black just kind of develops naturally with knight g7. For example, white kicks the bishop back. And now I really love this simple idea. Knight b3. Let's say black continues the attack. Knight c5, hitting the enemy queen. Queen, let's say, goes to c2, offering the trade. We say, Well, we could trade, but no, I'd rather give checkmate with queen b5. And oopsies, you guys already see the checkmate coming. For example, if black tries b6, then it's mate in 2. So this kind of a quick attack by white is very common when black castles queenside, and that's going to be a recurrent theme in some of the lines. So what if black does not retreat to h5? And actually, let me go back to this position and say, okay, I'm going to retreat the bishop to a different square. Let's say bishop to e6. Okay, bishop e6, white continues with the same plan. First, I like the move a3, indicating to my opponent, you know what, I may threaten to play b4 on you at some point. As a matter of fact, I like b4 idea only when the bishop is on e6. And why is that, you may wonder? Because of the following line. Knight g7, b4, knight g6, bishop b2. So now this pawn is under attack. Black typically plays a5 first rather than going after the pawn. And after b5, this is a well-known sequence. Knight takes d4. Now, what is the difference? The difference is this bishop is misplaced. Okay, black could win the c-pawn with knight takes c4, knight takes, bishop takes. As a matter of fact, it's equal pawns now. But as always, whenever black manages to win the pawn back, he is behind in development. So white plays simply queen c2. And now I really love the following idea that I discovered. Obviously, white has many promising moves, but this move is really beautiful. h4. Out of nowhere comes white's rook into the game. Knight takes. Of course, playing bishop d6 allows white to continue the attack. And now rook h3 coming out of the right field into the center. That's really incredible idea. So, and the bishop e7, now we play e4, trade, kicking the queen, and now bishop takes g7 gives white an absolutely winning position. For example, rook here, knight takes, check, simply king e2, and at the end of the day, black can simply resign. White's king is completely safe, and compare every single piece. Look at the rook, look at this rook, look at the queen, look at the queen, look at the bishop, look at that bishop. This is a huge threat. Black is completely busted. So these are the kind of ideas you have to remember when you see the move bishop to g4, and after h3, bishop retreats. Now, what if black simply trades on f3, you may wonder? In that case, white already gets the bishop pair. Black does win the pawn back on e5, so we play g3. You've seen this pattern before. We give up the pawn, castle, but at the end of the day, this bishop has no opposition. Queen is going to go to a4. The king is a bit vulnerable there on c8. For example, knight f6, queen a4, hitting the a pawn, king b8, knight b3. You see how white's queen, knight, and bishop are about to generate some real serious attack. So black tries this pawn storm, which actually is not going anywhere. Knight a5, hitting the pawn, c6, trying to block the bishop. And now I really love the following mini combination. f4, kicking the knight, and then sacking the knight on c6 for this incredible battery attack. Okay, even if white does not give checkmate right away, which is quite possible that he may, white can easily win the a pawn with checks and have just enough pawns for the knight. But I'll show you the checkmate. For example, h4, here comes checkmate. Check, check, draw the king, and queen c6 is mate. Rather simple, elegant way to prove the point. This bishop is a monster. So we pretty much looked at all the ideas, starting with the move bishop g4, this rapid development plan for black. I really love h3 And then depending on what black does, rapid development with g3, bishop g2, or a3, b4. Either way, white is better. But let's look at the main line. Knight g7. This is the move that was played by the Russian super GM Alexander Marzevich once. Knight b3. And now it's actually not an easy choice for black. Do you go after the e pawn with knight g6 and part with the d pawn, or do you protect with knight f5? Well, we're going to look at both options. First, let's start with the more classic way of trying to win the e pawn. We're going to win the d pawn, they're going to win the e pawn, trades happen, we play e3, and we ask black a question. You've sacrificed a central pawn, prove it. Prove it that you have any type of counterplay. It's actually not easy. For example, if black plays c5, trying to take advantage of the fact that white's gonna lose the right to castle, the endgame is completely safe for white. For example, takes, check, f3, black can throw in a couple of intermezzos here with castle check, another intermezzo, but at the end of the day, white's extra pawn does the job. Look at this beautiful pawn chain, bishop's under attack, white's about to win the second pawn, and black really has to try to escape to some drawn endgame down pawns, but there's probably no chance black can even draw this game. So what can black do? Well, probably his best move is this move bishop c5, and at grandmaster level, Anish Giri, who probably needs no introduction, he is the top 10 player and also famous theoretician, he actually erred here for white. He made a very logical move, but I do not like his move. He played very logical move bishop e2, and this was, I think, in a Title Tuesday game on chess.com, and his opponent actually messed up right away. His opponent castled and allowed Anish to simply be up a pawn with no compensation from black. Then white can develop the other bishop. But here after bishop e2, I don't like this queen g5 annoying move. And the idea, if we castle, now bishop h3 is coming, and if we play bishop f3, now they castle, all of a sudden there is just too much pressure in many different directions on all of our pieces. I think black is actually doing quite well for the pawn. So I thought long and hard, how to sort of improve on Anish Giri's game, and I came up with a brilliant novelty that was never played at the grandmaster level. And the novelty is very subtle. We simply play bishop to d2. We're giving up the pawn right back. Obviously, the threat is simply bishop c3 and expand. So if castles, then we'll just play bishop c3, for example. There is no danger whatsoever. Then we can play b4, bishop e2, right castle. Easy advantage with an extra pawn. So black wins the pawn. And now it looks as though black should make a draw. Equal pawns, but in reality, guys, things are not simple when the game is open and you have two bishops. And this is one thing that you should always remember. When the board is completely open like that, two bishops are worth half a pawn more than bishop and knight, meaning that it's actually white who still maintains a slight advantage. So I like to simply play bishop c3. If they give us check, we don't mind this knight d3 check because queens are about to be traded. Takes, king takes, hitting the knight. g7 pawn is also under attack. Knight f4, king f3. And black probably has to play some really pathetic moves like knight e6 or knight h5. And even though it's equal material, there is no doubt that only white is playing for a win in this endgame. And this is probably the best black has in this line. All right, so now that we've looked at the knight g6 setup, let's look at knight f5, a more aggressive approach. Black is holding on to the pawn, but at the same time, leaving white the e5 pawn. Now I like a tempo move e4, pretty much forcing the endgame. After en passant, queen takes check, knight takes, f takes e3. And this is a very instructive endgame that could happen in a lot of this Albin counter gambit ideas. why do I like white here, even though he has two doubled isolated pawns? The reason why I like white is once again the bishop pair. Keep in mind, these two pawns take a lot of squares away from black's pieces, and white can still generate lots of activity, even with those double pawns. So we're going to look at two plans for black. One plan is just a simple move, bishop e7. The other one is a little bit more active, bishop b4. So bishop e7 has been played once at a super grandmaster level, probably a blitz game, Grishuk against Nepomniachtchi. These are two super strong Russian super GMs. And Grishuk's choice is probably not the best, even though it's quite logical. He played bishop d3. But after knight h4, black is generating small counterplay and close enough for quality if he plays really, really well. It is still completely fine for white after king f2. But in that case, I decided, well, maybe bishop d3 is a little bit too quick. Why not simply improve the rest of our pieces, such as that b3 knight? Plus, we're trying to trade off his most active piece. Knight bd4 is my recommendation, guys, an improvement over Grishuk. Now, let's say black just ignores white. Bishop d2, we continue our development. Knight h4, completely ignore that, and castle. And now you realize that it's actually a good idea to keep the bishop on f1. And whereas black's pieces, I'm not even sure where they're going. White's king is quite safe. If black tries to play knight g6 with the idea of rook e8, bishop f8 perhaps, he actually will not be able to win the pawn. For example, now bishop d3, bishop c3, bishop f8, and this really amazing resource, bishop to c2. Obviously, taking the pawn is a big no-no. Just simply look at the discovery that white can do with one knight jump, such as knight b5. Black is busted. Both of these guys, and just in case, pawn is also under attack. So instead, black may try to play bishop g4, pin our knight, but after h3 takes, it's very difficult for black to gain the pawn. I would probably say impossible. And now the bishop on c2 has another cool function. Like I said, black is about to win the pawn, right? He's got three attackers, but we simply play bishop a4 and say, no way. Because of that pin, white maintains his extra pawn, white can double the rooks, and basically try to convert the advantage. And the other line, which I think is a little bit more forcing, this bishop b4 check. Now bishop d2 we probably don't want to play. Well, the reason is he's got this kind of annoying tactic, knight takes e3, and knight c2 winning the bishop with a fork. All right, so we don't want to do that. Instead, since we know this is an endgame, the king is quite safe on f2, we're going to go there, castles. I love this move g4, and this actually happened in one grandmaster game who was white. His opponent was low-rated player, and white actually won rather instructive game after h3, bishop e7, and black thinks, all right, I'm doing quite well. Yeah, maybe I'll play for f6, try to get my pieces back in the game. But white said, nope, you are completely lost. g5, knight f5, and it turns out that the bishop is taken one of the only squares away from the knight, guys. This is an easy win. You just have to spot a little puzzle rush-like tactic, e4, and black resigns, dropping whole knight. So that is my recommendation, okay, against the Albin counter gambit. You want to play knight f3 and then knight b d2 with a very simple idea of knight b3. And in a lot of lines, white either maintains the extra pawn or sometimes gives up the e-pawn but has a monster attack. In either case, you will get a great game and hopefully will win a lot of games. Thank you very much. This was Grandmaster Eugene Perelstein. Goodbye.